So we've started the first week. We started with defining emotion, which I think is an important part of the whole thing. And really that's that view in Buddhism that the emotions are like the afflictions and that they're like obstructions, and there is that clear blue sky, you could say, underneath, which is, I think, an optimistic view of the emotions. They're not inherent in anything. They're not like underlying anything. They're just there to engage with. And we also talked about how relating to the difficult emotion is a skill, and a skill that this word ignorance in Pali, avidya, means like a lack of skill. Last week we heard like an animal trainer or the skill of a doctor. So we just got to develop the skill, but we can develop the skill to handle or to work with or to relate to the difficult emotions. And then I also related it to the noble truths, and particularly this word noble, so that we need to, I think, respect our emotions, respect our suffering. And also part of that is becoming more aware of them, establishing actually there is this difficult emotion going on. And then that was also part of what we were trying to do with this stop. The first step was this word stop, feeling the emotion in the body, and also noting any thoughts that are happening with the emotion, turning towards it, as it were, so the emotion can't do its habitual thing that hasn't really been very helpful in the past. And then we also looked at, in step 2, as it were, that is applying the remedies, we looked at the importance of kindness in turning towards that difficult emotion. So training ourselves, I think that's just such an important part of this all, training ourselves to receive the difficult emotion with kindness. And so training ourselves really to, okay, if difficult emotion is coming up, let's apply kindness to this. Let's turn towards this. Let's receive this with kindness, rather than, blaming ourselves or pushing it away or anything. So we're trying to get into that space where we're neither pushing it away nor getting completely caught up in them. And then there is a space where we can actually start doing something. And in the applying, what I called applying the remedies, we also looked at various ways to develop positive emotion, and also, the importance of ethics, and that's also like a hard decision. I think just that hard decision not to harm, that hard decision to respect, and making this distinction between skillful and unskillful. And as you could see, is the difficult emotions are underlying our unskillful actions. So it's so important to look at that aspect of our experience. Anyway, I hope that was a fair summary of what we've done so far. We're going to move on to the third step in this kind of work that we're doing, this emotion training / mind training work that we're doing. And you could say that what we're doing today, what we're talking about today, is about changing the perspective. Let's just first say that then this is not about an emotion that's very, very, very strong in you and that you might not be able to contain even. We just first doing the things that we need to do to maybe calm down somewhat. And then we kind of have stopped in that sense. We're there with the emotion, we're present with it. And we have enough sort of enough mindfulness or awareness to do that exploration. So applying thought. So this is really about changing the perspective of like, how do we use thought, and how does this thought relate to these difficult emotions? How does this whole thing work? So this is something that we're going to be looking at right now. So one thing that might help, just as a thought, I haven't been able to find the research for it. I heard about somebody saying there has been research, but I haven't found the actual research. This is the research about the length of time that a difficult emotion is staying around in your brain, as it were. And that's what I read about it, is like 90 seconds. That's an idea. Let's just give ourselves that ballpark. I'm not sure whether it's exactly 90 seconds, but let's say it's a shortish time. So this emotion is around and we are experiencing it, suffering from it as the difficult emotion. And then what usually happens is that we have thoughts, and these thoughts, they work like putting oil on the fire. I don't know whether you recognize that. So there is a strong emotion, and then you start to calm down a bit, and then there is another, or you're thinking, oh, but they, da, 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 and then poof, there you go again. You recognize that. It just sort of like... Yeah. So the idea is that they do pass, but it's the thoughts that put the oil back on the fire, if that makes sense. And then you get that whole sort of not entangled whatever is structure of emotion and thought, and the body seizes up, and there's all these different things that are happening under the influence of the difficult emotion. And you could say that a characteristic of that difficult emotion is really that lack of awareness. That's a characteristic of it. There is just no mindfulness around, like what Abhaya Mani was also talking about earlier. So there is just no awareness there. And we're lost in thought, usually. Then we're on autopilot, lost in thought. The autopilot works well, doesn't it? I think that image of the autopilot. So these habitual thoughts are just going round and round and round and round. So that is the reason, I think, why we're trying to meditate, isn't it? Like with the mindfulness of breathing, for instance, we're just waking up from the thoughts, back to the breath, waking up from the thoughts. So coming back to the present. So because also, with the lost in thought, it just means like, well, you're just not present, are you? So I think a lot of us might know, but I'm not going to assume this, that this is a process that in Buddhism, it has a name. This rumination or thought proliferation process has a name, and it's called papancha. And I'll write that in my email tomorrow. Just don't worry if you haven't heard this. And it's in Sanskrit, it's prapancha. So you got this R. I don't know why, but the Sanskrit has the R and the Pali doesn't. So papancha or prapancha. It's this process of rumination. I'll just go into it a tiny bit more, just to get us into the territory. So this is like how the Buddha, one of the ways that the Buddha explains the cyclical nature of our thoughts and how we create our own suffering through that. So this is actually from the Honeyball Sutra. Just to read this out, I'll send it to you tomorrow. The Honeyball Sutra. Dependent on I and forms, I consciousness arises. The meeting of the three is contact. With contact as a requisite condition, there's feeling. What one feels, one perceives, so one labels it in the mind. What one perceives, one thinks about. What one thinks about, one complicates. Based on what a person complicates, the perceptions and categories of complication assail him with regard to the past and the present and the future, forms recognizable via the I. I'll send this to you, don't worry about that, but I'll just to go into that a bit more, just based on whatever it is, a thought or you're hearing a sound or you're smelling something, you could say then that is that contact. And then we're feeling something about that, and then we're labeling it, and then we start to think about it, and we start to kind of get lost in thought about it. So that's usually how it works. So just suppose that in this moment you might be feeling something in the body. I don't know what it is, but you might be feeling something in the body. Could be tiny ache. I actually personally really saw through this when I was on a retreat when I was still living in the Netherlands, I was meditating and I had this sort of thing in my stomach. And then in my mind's eye, I've been meditating quite a lot. It was really clear. In my mind's eye, I had this pain in my stomach, and then I thought, oh no, I'm going to get ill. Oh no, I'm going to get so ill. They need to phone an ambulance. And then in my mind's eye, I actually saw the ambulance already driving up in front of the retreat center to bring me to the hospital. Anyway, this is just a classical case of papancha, and this is often how it works. It just starts with like one thought, or one memory, or one sniff of whatever. And there we go. We're just like lost in that thought. So I just thought that would be useful for us to remember that process of papancha is incredibly important in relation to the work that we're doing with the difficult emotions, because with the difficult emotions, I'm not sure whether you've noticed it when you were getting more inquisitive about what kind of thoughts were coming up, that there is a particular speed sometimes as well with the difficult emotions. So if the thoughts are coming hard and fast, you can bet there is some sort of difficult emotion underlying there, if that makes some sort of sense. So if you start to pay attention about what are these thoughts doing, it's usually there is kind of like they might be whirling around like mad, and then there is usually a difficult emotion, like for instance anger, that's sort of propelling us. I know that often when I talk about this, people say, no, that's not the case with me at all. I think sometimes it could also go the other way. There might be some sort of numbness somehow, and it just might seem like there hardly are any thoughts. But however which way, in the difficult emotion, it's going to be so much harder to be aware of the thoughts. We just usually get lost in them in some way or another. Hope that makes some sort of sense. I hope so. This is. I hope that you will find that useful as well. In terms of thinking about the positive emotion and the difficult emotion, and thinking about how useful it is to train yourself to wake up from these thoughts. And that's, you could use any kind of meditation to teach yourself that, to learn to do that. But another thing that another angle we might want to take on this is that when we are under the influence of a difficult emotion, our perspective is distorted. So that is what we're calling, why we're calling it affliction or obscuration or distortion. You could guarantee that when a difficult emotion is around, your perspective is going to be distorted on the situation that you're in. And it is also because under the influence of the difficult emotions, you just seem to narrow down. So your awareness is narrowing down, and you just can't really see beyond that sort of like contracted feeling. And it even becomes a bit claustrophobic sometimes. I don't know whether you recognize that when a very difficult emotion is going on, it just feels so tight and unpleasant in that way, doesn't it? So if we could say that, let's just suppose that I'm coming into a particular room, I've got a bit of a bad mood, whatever, and come into a room, like maybe my kitchen, whatever, I'll start to notice, okay, there's dust there, I should clean the windows. I'm just describing my own kitchen here. And we got to kind of like, I've got to clean this, or oh my God, this is not right. You see, so you're coming into a space and you start to notice all these things that are wrong and that are irritating and that irritate you. Yeah, this is actually because there is this emotion that's playing around in the mind, as it were. I come into the kitchen, I'm happy, I'm elated, I'm joyful. I see, oh, there's this beautiful thing here. Oh, what a lovely color we've got there. And how amazing that this thing is doing this there. Or how amazing that ended up on the floor. It was totally, do you see what I mean? It's the same kitchen, isn't it? Exactly the same kitchen, but our mood, our emotion determines what we pick up, what details we pick up, what our mind latches onto. Yeah, does that make sense to people? Mm-hmm. So we could just say that there is this distortion going on, and then we're this is our session today is really about going into this and trying to open up that perspective a bit more. And so I'm just reading from my notes here, so I hope that my notes add up. So I've got a few more things, and if I do miss out on things, do let me know. If I said I'm going to speak about this and I haven't, do let me know. In terms of the papancha, so this proliferation that the difficult emotion is associated with, what often happens when we are in a difficult emotion is we get this narrative going. I don't know whether you recognize that when you're thinking, they shouldn't have done that, and she said this, and he said that, and why did they do that? And then you just sort of going on and on, and you on and on and on and on and on and on about this story, this narrative. So another thing that we could try to do when we're in the difficult emotion is knowing this is a narrative. Knowing this narrative is coming up because this difficult emotion is going on. Let's just not go into the narrative. The narrative is not going to lead me away from suffering. If I stay in this narrative, this suffering is just going to continue. So waking up from that narrative, it's only a narrative, it's a distorted narrative because of that difficult emotion. So what we could do in that moment is drop back into how does it feel in the body. So we're waking up from the narrative, coming back into the body, coming back into the present moment. That's another way of getting out of that jungle, as it were, of thoughts and rumination. So that's another reason why it's so important to train ourselves to go back to the body time. And again, it's a real good anchor point to come back into the here and the now. So when when all these stories are flowing out, we seem to be losing perspective. So we're trying to come out of that. So all these questions about who has done what and who is to blame, etc., they're just not very useful. And in the Buddhist sense, yes, you could call this rumination, but another way of describing it is unwise attention. So in our work with the difficult emotions, you call that unwise attention. The attention goes into all sorts of things that are not going to help us and others that are going to not help anyone. So that you could say is unwise attention. And the last thing I'm going to say about this before we do our meditation is this gorgeous piece of writing from the Buddhist tradition, which you might or might not recognize, but I'll read it out anyway, just to... So, it's just as if a man were wounded with an arrow, thickly smeared with poison. His friends and companions, kinsmen and relatives would provide him with a surgeon, and the man would say, I won't have this arrow removed until I know whether the man who wounded me was a noble warrior, a Brahmin, a merchant, or a worker. He would say, I won't have this arrow removed until I know the given name and clan name of the man who wounded me, until I know whether he was tall, medium, or short, until I know whether he's dark, ruddy, brown, or golden colored, until I know his home village, town, or city, until I know whether the bow with which I was wounded was a longbow or a crossbow, until I know whether the bowstring with which I was wounded was fiber, or bamboo, or threads, or sinew, or hemp, or bark, until I know whether the shaft with which I was wounded was wild or cultivated, until I know whether the feathers of the shaft with which I was wounded were those of a vulture, a stork, a hawk, a peacock, or another bird, until I know whether the shaft with which I was wounded was bound with the sinew of an ox, a water buffalo, a langur, I don't know what a langur is, but never mind, or a monkey. He would say, I won't have this arrow removed until I know whether the shaft with which I was wounded was that of a common arrow, a curved arrow, a barbed, a calf-toothed, or an oleander arrow. The man would die, and those things would still remain unknown to him. So that is from a sutta. And I'll send the text to you tomorrow. But you see what I mean? So this is what we're doing. The difficult emotion is going on, and our thoughts are just going into these speculations, and they're just going into all these things that are just not going to help us. And so the next topic we're going to speak about is wise attention, obviously. But I hope that was a bit of an illustration of how papancha and proliferation, unwise attention, does not help at all with the work with the difficult emotion. So waking up from our thoughts is one of the things that we need to train ourselves in with all of this. Yeah, everybody okay? Yeah. So what we'll do now is just have some meditation, and just looking at my schedule, how I'm doing with my... Well, I'm not doing too great, actually. I'm a bit late. But anyway, we're going to do some meditation, about 10 minutes. I hope that's okay, that it's not too it's a bit short, I know, but let's just do 10 minutes of meditation. I'll give us a few invitational suggestions when we're starting, okay? Let's find our posture. So it's just 10 minutes of sitting with the mind and the body and the emotions. And we can't switch on or off, but we can keep the body still, so the mind might be following. It won't follow instantly, but it will at some point. Body fairly still. And now I just invite you to tune into the breathing body, just noticing the body responding to the breath. Really feeling that breath in the body, feeling that sensations in the body, feeling the breath as a texture. You might feel the shoulders or the belly, the rib cage responding, moving on the breath. So our object of attention is the breath at the moment. Now the invitation is just whenever the mind wanders off into thought proliferation, to notice that and come back to the breath. And you might also want to notice when you're aware of having drifted off, if there's any emotional tone there. We're using the breath as our anchor to come back into the present, out of the proliferation, the thicket of thoughts. Just waking up from those thought proliferations back to the breath. And maybe in the last minute of the meditation, just sitting with your, whatever the mind or the body are doing. No need to attempt anything. No effort necessary at all. Just a few moments of absorbing the practice, the thoughts. So we're continuing more on this, in this mode of wise attention and unwise attention. And so we talked about mainly the unwise attention, which is just thinking all these thoughts about this, that, and the other. There is another sutta, which is the Sabbasava Sutta. Oh yeah, 0 degrees in Cambridge, yeah. I'm not too far away from you, Anne, but it is a bit colder. Maybe because I'm in the countryside, I'm not sure. Anyway, this is from the Sabbasava Sutta. Some examples of the inappropriate attention, as it were. Did I exist in the past? Did I not exist in the past? What was I in the past? How was I in the past? After being what did I come in the past? Will I exist in the future? Will I not exist in the future? What will I be in the future? How will I be in the future? After being what will I become in the future? Anyway, I won't sort of continue. There's a lot more of these. There's just all these sort of questions that might go through our minds when the difficult emotion is playing out that aren't that helpful at all. So we're encouraged to actually think about the wise attention. And in this sutta, it said they properly attend. This is suffering. This is the origin of suffering. This is the cessation of suffering. This is the practice that leads to the cessation of suffering. Actually, I think this is just incredibly pragmatic. We recognize the Four Noble Truths here, don't we? It's incredibly pragmatic. So there is a difficult emotion going on. Okay, so let's just not think about all these other things that aren't that helpful, but attend to it, look after it. It's a bit like looking after a wound in a way when a difficult emotion is going on. So we're looking after it and clearly perceiving it, knowing this is suffering, this is a difficult emotion. I'm holding on to it. There's things I can do to get out of it, but what is it that I can do? So that's what we're looking at, isn't it? We're looking at all these different bits and pieces that we could do. That isn't about all these questions that we're asking ourselves that aren't that helpful. They're just purely speculative. I found a piece of another quote. This is Thanissaro. I found it helpful. And he's writing, when we look at ourselves with appropriate attention, we focus not on what we are, but what we're doing. So in particularly on whether what we're doing is unskillful, leading to suffering, or skillful, leading to its end. I'll say more about that, but so in terms of these questions, or where the mind is going under the influence of the difficult emotion, so how I understand this to be is it is often about, when you're having a difficult emotion, I'm so stupid, and why do I always do this, and I am this, and I am that, and it's never going to be this, it's never going to be that. I hope you recognize these kind of thoughts. So these are all these thoughts that are about like some sort of, it's just fantasy, really. It's just a narrative. It's not going to help. It's about all these descriptions about how we are, which is completely, it's such a narrow perspective that we're having at the moment. It's just not realistic. It's not pragmatic. It's just not how things are. It's about how things are not. That is, we're seeing things as they are not in that difficult mind state. So what are we doing? We're bringing this appropriate attention to the difficult emotion. And this is called Yoniso Manasikara. That's the Pali word for Yoniso Manasikara, and the unskillful way, as it were, the inappropriate attention is called Ayoniso Manasikara. I'll write that in my email to you. So you could say that this wise reflection, the Yoniso Manasikara, is this ability to focus on questions that lead to the end of suffering. So the ability to focus on questions that lead to the end of suffering, so not perpetuating it. So it's knowing which questions are helpful to ask about it and which questions aren't. So basically, well, you could divide those two into that all these questions about it's this, it's that, and why this and why that aren't that very helpful. But a very helpful question would be like, what am I going to do now? What can I do now that's going to help me? And this is not in the spirit of denying anything. We're not sort of trying to push it away. We're just, because there could be a really simple answer to this. What am I going to do now that's going to help me? It could be, I'm going to respond with kindness. Yeah, could be, I'm going to respond with kindness. I'm going to respond with acceptance. Or it could be, what am I going to do now? I'm going to take myself off for a walk because I'm so triggered. I need to kind of just be in an open space for a bit. You see, they could be fairly simple answers to that question. But really the question is, when the difficult emotion arises, what is the skillful thing to do now? Yeah. So not getting stuck in all these theories about our existence and why we're here and da-di-da-di-da, which have their place, but I don't think it's very helpful in that particular moment when you're under the influence of the difficult emotion. So what is also suggested in terms of appropriate attention is that you could use these instruments that we know from the Dharma, some of them, and some of these Dharma teachings, for instance, are about actions have consequences. So it isn't that we can have a useful reflection on, okay, how did it get to this point? But then sort of not getting sort of too much caught up in all that da-di-da-di-da-di-da about it. But so just to concentrate on, for instance, actions have consequences. That would just be a useful consideration or reflection to go into at that moment. Let me just see what else I've got here. So whatever you're doing, but just starting to investigate it, starting to bring your attention into what is actually happening here with the difficult emotion. So that would be, so what do I actually feel in the body? What kind of thoughts are going on here? What can I do? What can I do right now to help this, to make sure this is not going to perpetuate, that's not going to spill over in unskillful action. So I've got like a load of quotes here. This is on my text. There's a load of quotes here. Let's see. This is something from Gil Fronsdal that I found helpful. So he's saying bringing interest in investigation to an experience can change our relationship to the experience because it changes the ecology of the mind. It changes the ecology of the mind, so to speak. Investigation brings this wholesome quality to the mind, which can initiate a significant shift in the mind, which is then otherwise filled with unwholesome thoughts and actions. So he says investigation can also like lubricate the mind, loosen it up when it's stuck or tight, obsessing about something or feeling constricted. So basically that kind of just to start to employ that faculty of wise attention is going to change the way our mind is functioning in that particular moment. And somehow just doing that is going to help finding a way out. I think I've kind of repeated this point several times now. I think we got it now, don't we? I think so. I hope so. Yeah, so an image for this in terms of you could. So this is also how you could try out in yourself how this works. Which questions are wise questions to ask, and which questions aren't wise to ask. It is really. If you see the situation, the emotion, the thoughts as some sort of knot, maybe we've got somebody who is knitting here earlier on, but you could have this ball of wool and it's all kind of tangled, and then you got to kind of disentangle it, that. So just let's say that our difficult emotion is our mind in that state of like it is knotted up, it's tangled like a ball of wool that's sort of gone astray. Cat has been playing with it, perhaps. You see what I mean? So you get this tangled piece of whatever it is. So when we're trying to disentangle that, you get you could say the questions that you ask that are the wrong questions are going to be those questions that are starting to kind of contract it more, make it more difficult. And the questions that we can ask that are going to be helpful are the questions that make it looser. And then you can feel that directly in the mind. You can check that with yourself. Is this a helpful question to ask? It just seems like to make it more constrict, more tight, more claustrophobic. And the other questions that are wise are going to make it opener and bring us in touch with some sort of ray of light or the way out. Anyway, I hope I've done a tolerable job with this, conveying this. I hope so. We've got somebody who, I think this is too late, I'm afraid, to come into the meeting. So I have a few questions that we could ask ourselves to reflect on right now that I think might be in the category of wise attention. And so I thought we could just do that right here, right now. And I'm just going to ask you a question. Just suppose that you have a difficult emotion, or maybe you can bring one to mind that's fairly fresh, as it were. If you want to just think about any kind of situation at the moment that you find difficult or challenging or upsetting, whatever, don't, let's not disappear in it, but maybe, if you have situations that are very difficult, maybe take one that isn't so hugely difficult, but slightly difficult, but just for us to practice with, to ask these questions. So a question we could ask ourselves in terms of the situation we find ourselves in. Okay, this is the situation. This is the situation as I experience it now. Like, let's just look at the whole situation. Okay, so what is the whole situation here? So not only my kind of bit here. Let's just see if I can reflect on the whole situation. I'm just going to give ourselves a few minutes to do that in your own time. You might want to write about it or just sort of sit, whatever. So we have a challenging situation. Let's just see if we can look at the whole situation rather than just our own perspective on it. Let's see if that works. It's just a few minutes. I'm going to give us 3 minutes, okay? Still respecting our own emotion. So that's nearly 3 minutes. So that's us for a bit. I'm not sure. I mean, I don't think that we're going to go into whether this worked for us or what each of us have been thinking. I don't think we've got the time for that, but I'm hoping that the principle of it might work. The principle being that in a difficult emotion, our perspective is quite narrow, really self-referential. When we start to ask ourselves the question, what else is happening here? What else is happening in this situation? There's another person in that situation, perhaps. There's other factors in that situation. You start to kind of like open up that narrow down perspective. So this is just something that you could try out if you remember, if you're calm enough, let's face that, if you're calm enough to start applying thoughts in that kind of way, open up the perspective a bit more, shifting the perspective with the emotion. Hope that made some sort of sense. We've got a bit of time as well later on to just do a collective gathering of any findings or questions or anything. I'm going to give you another one to reflect on for a few minutes. Just suppose that you're under the influence of a difficult emotion. Just reflect on what happens if I act out of this emotion. What happens if I act out of this emotion? Just reflect on that. So this is another question we could ask ourselves. What is going to happen if I act out of this difficult emotion? Just a few minutes to consider that one. We could just take it easy, that a bit like dropping a pebble into our mind. It doesn't have to be very effortful. Yeah, there was another reflection that we could use, and us sort of trying it now maybe might make it more likely for this to remember when we need it to use this kind of tool, the tool of shedding a different light on that narrowed perspective. I found again in my notes another translation or description of that of that wise attention. It's taking to heart in the right way. I quite like that, taking to heart in the right way. I have one more, just if this doesn't work for you guys to reflect in this way, just bear with us. But let's just do another one. And maybe we're run out of difficult emotions already, but maybe we haven't. Maybe remember a few. So another thing a question or something to reflect on when we are in a difficult emotion, a difficult situation, perhaps with difficult emotions. Realize that I'm not only the victim in the situation, but I'm also an actor in the situation. I'm not only the victim in the situation, but I'm also the actor, a actor in the situation. So I'm just going to give us a few minutes just to apply this on our experience and see how that works. Yeah, I think that was another 3 minutes. Yeah, so we try this out to hopefully remember. We're now in a session together. I'm not sure whether you have a difficult emotion going on, but I assume that it's usually a bit stronger outside of the session. I'm just assuming that in the course of the week, we will obviously have situations that trigger us and that we get angry, irritated, whatever, or, jealous or any other difficult emotions will come. And so the invitation is really to, if that does happen, and we can be with it, we can start this way of investigating the mind, that we might be able to try some of these reflections on it and see if they have any effect. So it's just really to get the mind from mulling over things that are not going to help to asking that question, what can I do right now? In the dharmic kind of sense, and skillful. What is it that I can do now that's skillful? And asking some of these questions, doing some of these reflections might help opening things up somehow. And I think the point of it is also just to know that it is not going to be in our advantage or in anybody's advantage to keep the emotion, the difficult emotion, to keep it doing its thing, to not do anything about it, if that makes sense. It is just not going to help us. There's no advantage in being in the difficult emotion. There's no advantage. So, and that's interesting as well to reflect on. You might believe this or not, that's really up to you, but you might want to try this out. Sometimes when I'm trying this out, I'm thinking, especially with anger, there's that righteous anger, isn't there? We're kind of really convinced we're right, and this is completely right. And why should we not be angry? Because we're incredibly angry, and everybody would be angry, etc. Do you know that one? So it's hard because sometimes we are not convinced of that. We're just not convinced of the fact that these difficult emotions they don't have an advantage. So that helps as well as a reflection. So to throw that one in. What is the advantage here of staying with this difficult emotion? So that's another one. I'll send you a few more in a list tomorrow of these reflections. But that's about all I had to say in terms of the unwise attention, the tendency for the difficult emotion to keep sort of putting oil on the fire, and then the thoughts coming, more difficult emotion, it just keeps going round and round and round. So the value of teaching ourselves to wake up from the proliferation, that from the unwise attention, in fact, and then turning that towards wise attention, turning that towards engaging with the difficult emotion in a way that is skillful, asking ourselves, what can we do? And then the questions that we could ask is, what can I do that's skillful? And reflecting on these particular questions to open up the perspective. I hope that was remotely made some sort of sense somehow, that hung together in a. I certainly hope so. In my mind, it does. Let me just see what Maria Jose said. Shantideva. If there is a solution, then what is the point of dejection? What is the point of dejection if there is no solution? Yeah. Thank you. Well, it's hard, isn't it, that one? Because of, you're worrying. Somebody says to you, why do you worry? Worrying doesn't make any kind of sense. And but those rational, often I completely see this as well. Often these rational questions can be a bit difficult, can't they? Because you're so triggered. But we're hoping to get into a space, and we're kind of like, we've already practiced with this quite a bit already, that these kind of questions are going to help us integrating that emotion in a larger perspective somehow, and knowing that our perspective is narrowed down, distorted, as it were. Let me see what's in the chat here. Okay, let's just, the home practice I'll send to you tomorrow, but just that you could start on the one that isn't the writing practice. We have a writing practice again. And this is all about changing the perspective. So the writing practice is an invitation to try out to change perspective. And the other one is just maybe a few minutes a day, 5 minutes a day, make a few notes whilst, because you're working with this in your mind during the day, noticing the mind going into proliferation. Just noticing that, working with that, bringing it back. So just having that as our kind of the thing that we are focusing on this week. And also just see if the difficult emotion arises, see if you can work with these reflections. And I'll send you a list tomorrow. Just see if you can apply 1 or 2 of these reflections when the difficult emotions arise, which they're bound to do in the course of the week. This is human life, isn't it? And there's plenty of difficult emotions floating around, so we won't have to wait too long, I'm sure. Okay, I hope that you're all sort of fairly happy after the session. I'm delighted that you're still here because we're a few minutes over, but let's just bring it to a close then. And thanks so much for joining in. I'll send you the email tomorrow or tonight, and then see you again, hopefully next week for our last session together, okay? Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome. You're very welcome.
Great. Thank you.